The first rule of Raw Underground: you do not talk about Raw Underground, because if you do, they might bring it back, and trust me, no one wants that. During the pandemic era, the WWE tried to introduce new concepts and new ideas to their Monday Night Raw show amidst a steady decline in viewership. One of those ideas was Raw Underground, a series of worked shoot matches that were filmed very differently to what WWE fans were used to, for the most part anyway. Raw Underground didn't last long. We were told on the final week that Raw Underground would return, but it was completely axed from television and it hasn't been mentioned since. So let's take a look at this weird idea and let's see if we can work out what went wrong. The pandemic era of pro wrestling, in my opinion, was one of the worst times in pro wrestling history in terms of overall content. The performers weren't to blame, creative wasn't to blame either, it was you were to blame. You, the pro wrestling fan who could no longer attend wrestling shows due to lockdown restrictions. WWE and other companies produced shows that didn't have a live audience, and I felt that the whole industry suffered because of it. Fans making noise and having a good time really makes all the difference for other fans who watch wrestling shows on TV, and I'll admit, I didn't think at first it would have been a big problem. I remember thinking there would be a heavier focus on in-ring storytelling, and the guys and girls competing in the ring had a rare opportunity to make viewers become ultra-focused on their match because there would be zero distractions. But the WWE kind of moved in another direction where they almost pretended a crowd was still in attendance. Almost like the agents and wrestlers laid out these matches while guessing where and when the audience would react to certain moments. This kind of prompting from a live audience is a big factor in any pro wrestling match. You'll see wrestlers feed off the energy of the crowd, and really it's a key ingredient when making memorable moments that can't be manufactured. But the WWE tried to create something that just wasn't there. They tried to manufacture live audience reactions with the whole Thunderdome thing. Producers would tell the fans in the Thunderdome how to react as they sat at home watching live shows with a webcam pointing directly at their faces. And this, along with piped-in crowd noises, was how WWE would try to recapture the magic of a live audience and make their TV shows a little better. You know, fair play to them, I say. I know there's people who disagreed with wrestling organizations still producing shows during this era, but WWE and other companies tried their best to work through the uncertainty, and they tried their best to move forward within these restrictions. We can all rip this era apart and say it was bad, but had the world not come to a standstill, then obviously things would have been very different. And just like any time period or era of pro wrestling, the pandemic era will have its fans. There will be folks out there who appreciated pro wrestling still being on their TV screens while they were sitting at home with nowhere to go. During this unprecedented time, the WWE experimented quite a bit with new ideas and concepts for wrestling matches. Examples for such experiments include the Firefly Funhouse match, the Boneyard match, and the 2020 Money in the Bank ladder matches. I thought some of these matches were good and some not so much, but more importantly than what I think, each match got people talking. Matches would take place away from a wrestling ring and put into new, usually unseen locations, and no matter what you may think of these aforementioned matches, you can't say that they weren't at least interesting in some shape or form. Overall feedback was positive, so it made sense for the WWE to take viewers away from the ring, bring them to new locations, and see if they could make something that would help people forget that we're in this brutal era of pro wrestling that didn't have a live audience. Over time, however, viewership took a hit, especially on WWE's Raw show. It was getting more and more difficult for casual viewers to stay engaged with pro wrestling as a whole, and Raw seemed to be affected the most. So, in August of 2020, a new concept would air on the WWE's Monday Night Television show, which wouldn't be a one-and-done deal like previous ideas. This would be an ongoing series named Raw Underground. Yeah, put Underground after anything and it's instantly way cooler, right? Sonic Underground, Tony Hawk's Underground, Need for Speed Underground, Lucha Underground, you get the message. Rather than explain what Raw Underground was, let's look at its TV debut from start to end, and then we'll discuss what's going on afterwards. On the 3rd of August 2020, after the first match on Raw, we see a big dude standing outside a door. The commentators say something's going down tonight on Raw. They aren't sure what it is, but whatever's going on, it's all Shane McMahon's idea. Apparently, this actually was a Shane McMahon idea in real life, by the way. Something's going on behind that door though, and viewers are going to have to find out a little later on. Just before 10 PM, we get a sneak peek at what's happening, and it's guys fighting in a ring without ring ropes. Shane McMahon's in there, and he's asking folks around the ring if they're having fun. He then approaches a few dancers bathed in pink lights, and he asks how they're doing, and yeah, it looks like they're doing just fine. And Shane says there's a lot of exciting things going on in Raw Underground, with more to come in just a moment. We come back at 10 PM, and Shane explains exactly what Raw Underground's all about. Shane says, and I quote, "There's no rules, lots of excitement, carnage, chaos, and quite frankly, a lot of things I'd like to see, quite frankly." Shane then says we have a contest coming up, a fight's going to take place in Raw Underground. Shane calls Dabba Kato to the ring, he's a big boy for sure. And as far as Dabba's opponent, well, Shane doesn't even introduce him, he just says he's in a lot of trouble. The bell rings, it's a worked shoot fight with a million camera cuts in the space of about 10 seconds. Dabba Kato beats up Raw Underground Jobber number 1 in no time at all. Jobber number 2 jumps in to fight Dabba Kato next, and when Dabba starts laying in the elbow, Shane jumps in to stop the match. Jobber 2 gets thrown out. Shane says Dabba Kato's awesome, and that's the first glimpse we get of this new idea. The commentators sell it afterwards like it's the greatest thing ever. Samoa Joe says it's a wonderful thing, while Tom Phillips says Shane's really onto something with this Raw Underground idea. There's more to come on this episode of Raw, but let's rewind for a moment and just take this all in. Basically, Raw Underground is Shane McMahon's very own fight club. Matches are filmed in a way that makes your head spin. Matches are also very brief, and it looks like fights end via submission or when Shane says that's enough. The venue looks like a dirty warehouse, but we can tell it's the performance center. Exotic dancers are on hand because I don't know. And the WWE are presenting these fights in a way that kinda looks realistic maybe? I don't know. Whatever the case, the initial impression you get isn't a good one. Again, I appreciate WWE trying something different, and in their defense, their hands were tied in regards to what they could realistically do. But first impressions mean everything, and right from the get-go, I thought this was pretty awful. I've heard the term Brawl for All 2.0 thrown around for Raw Underground, and that has to be one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard in my life. Brawl for all its problems and all the flack it gets, was legitimate. Raw Underground, of course, was not. It didn't look legit and it didn't feel legit. Anyway, Shane welcomes us back later on, and he has to break up a fight between 2 of the 3 Raw Underground dancers. He says we can have their match next week if we need to. I sure hope we don't. The Boy Wonder brings us back to the ring for another fight. We have Eric of the Viking Raiders versus a Tough Kid. That's what Shane calls him, a Tough Kid. And Tough Kid goes down after a few suplexes and a knee to the face. Shane talks into the microphone during matches, giving us incredible insight with lines such as, "Oh, that's sick," "Oh geez," and "Wow, that's vicious." Also, to show he isn't a complete animal, Shane calls for a doctor when Tough Kid lies on the mat completely unresponsive. So our master of ceremonies isn't a complete brat who just makes people fight for his own amusement. He has a heart. Samoa Joe says he loves this format after the fight, and it looks like Byron Saxton knows exactly what's up. Byron thinks this is absolute dog shit. Anyway, Retribution, another bad WWE idea, was recorded earlier vandalizing property because they're super hard. In the Hurt Business feel like Retribution, the recent power cuts on Raw, and their own bad luck is a result of sabotage. These boys think it's something to do with Raw Underground, seeing as all these problems began when Shane's Fight Club made its debut. So MVP, Shelton and Lashley pay Shane a visit at the end of Raw. After Dolph Ziggler gets done beating up another randomer, and after Shane gets done complimenting Ziggler's Jordans, the Hurt Business show up to take over the show. Lashley gets in the ring, or he stands on the platform, whatever, and MVP announces that Raw Underground is now under new management. So in week number 1, we already have a takeover. Fantastic. A fine young gentleman steps up to Bobby Lashley and he gets slammed to the mat and knocked out with a big punch. MVP then picks a fight with an innocent bystander, and our guy here talked about Shelton Benjamin's mom, so he too gets wiped out. The Hurt Business then just brawl with other innocent bystanders. Shane says the Hurt Business are welcome to come back to Raw Underground anytime they want. I thought they just took over the show, but okay. And just as MVP says business is booming, Raw fades to black and viewers instantly take to social media to talk about Raw Underground. Someone else who went to social media to talk about Raw Underground was Shane McMahon himself, and check this out. I hope everyone enjoyed Raw Underground. Lots of work to do, but looking forward to week 2. Lots of work to do, it's like totally admitting, hey, we know it wasn't great, but stick around, we'll make it better. Fans criticised everything about the new format, from the camera cuts all the way to the use of exotic dancers. But there were a few fans who were eager to see what was next too. Let's not pretend like everyone absolutely hated it, but yeah, the majority did. Another gripe that many people had was the fact that WWE was trying to be something it was not, and in doing so, they were ripping off ideas from other wrestling organisations with horrible results. Shane McMahon had promised week 2 of Raw Underground, so here we go. August 10th, 2020, and I should mention here too that Raw Underground would only air after 10 PM to make it kind of feel like it was for mature audiences only. Shane approaches the door to Raw Underground. We can see that it's Big Omos providing security, and when we get inside the warehouse, or whatever it's supposed to be, we can see Riddick Moss having a fight while Shane welcomes us back to Raw Underground. He offers more great insight into this fight by saying, "Nice reversal, and that's it boys," as the fight continues on. The two end up on the outside as Shane reminds us that there's no rules in these Raw Underground matches, and the brief scuffle ends with Moss laying in a right hand. It's fucking riveting stuff. Shane announces Moss as our winner before saying who knows what's going to happen next in Raw Underground. And I don't know Shane, but I'm going to guess it'll be another underwhelming shoot fight. You know, I could actually really get behind work shoot matches, but the way they're presented here, along with the breakneck speed of each match, it just leads to a lack of excitement. There's nothing to look forward to. Arturo Huas gets a match next against another no-name J-Brown, and I was about to say that this has been the best and maybe most believable match we've had so far, but the last kick Huas lands misses by a mile and our guy still gets knocked out. Keep in mind that these segments were pre-recorded, so there's no excuse for this. We can see Swerve Strickland and Mansoor watching the action on the outside, and they want no piece of Arturo. So after a commercial break, we get another Dabba Kato versus Jobber match. A match that ends when Dabba Kato grabs his opponent's wiener before laying him out with a right hand. I am not joking. Shayna Baszler then jumps in the ring, and clearly that stunt Dabba pulled off won't work against the Queen of Spades. So Shane gives the ring to Baszler, and as expected, no one wants to fight Shayna. So Shayna grabs her own opponent and she starts going to work. Eventually, multiple onlookers join in on the fight, including Ivy Nile, but it turns into yet another squash match. It's 3-on-1 and Shayna takes everyone out. Again, Tom Phillips and Samoa Joe think this is the best thing ever, while Baron Saxton looks on in disbelief. There's no further underground action on this episode of Raw, but the feedback came in and it was pretty negative. So negative, in fact, that Ken Shamrock even offered his assistance to make Raw Underground feel a little more legit, but unfortunately, nothing came of this. It's 10 o'clock on the 17th of August. You know what that means? It's time for Raw Underground, also known as your weekly Raw toilet break. Eric of the Viking Raiders versus loser number, 7 or 8? I've already lost count, but Shane McMahon and Dolph Ziggler are having a great old time. That's all that matters, right? Eric wins his match and Dolph gives his performance a 4 out of 10. Not bad, but not great. Eric takes exception to this and he challenges Ziggler to a match. So this is probably the first Raw Underground match that could be a little unpredictable. Eric slams Ziggler around a few times while Dolph keeps going for a single leg takedown. In the end, Dolph sticks his thumb in Eric's eye and this leads to a chokeout. Dolph Ziggler wins and nothing comes of it. Oh no, wait, here comes Big Ivar to knock Dolph out of the ring. It's kind of funny too because there's all this violence going on, but as soon as Dolph Ziggler takes this bump, the action comes to a standstill and it's like there's now a big medical emergency that needs instant attention. A little later on, Shane just forgets about Dolph because we now have Arturo Huas versus Riddick Moss. These two laid in quite a bit to be fair, and it's probably the best match of Raw Underground up until this point, but believe me, that's not saying much. It ends when both men tumble out of the ring and they start brawling with members of the underground audience. So it's a draw, no clear winner. Shane McMahon, for the 10th time since Raw Underground began, says that was sick as Raw moves on. We then get told that Ivar vs Dolph Ziggler is going to take place next week on Raw Underground. I can't wait. And back in the warehouse, we get Marina Shafir against some random lady. You don't know Marina, but you do know Marina. Shafir wins the match in a matter of seconds. She gets attacked by Nia Jax, and Nia's now picking fights with everyone standing on the outside. Shayna Baszler steps up, and we think we're going to get Nia versus Shayna, but Nia bounces out and she decides to leave the Raw Underground warehouse. That's how it ended this week, guys. Nothing more, nothing less. I'm starting to notice something. It feels like Raw Underground has no end game and no real purpose. I mean, yeah, future NXT stars are getting spotlighted and some guys and girls standing around the ring are being given something to do on Monday Night TV, I guess. But shouldn't there be more story around why Shane put this together in the first place and how he's getting these people to fight for his own enjoyment? Already it feels like nothing but filler content for Monday Night Raw, and yes, I know WWE wanted to change things up during this bleak era of pro wrestling, but there's no reason to get excited for Raw Underground. The next week, Raw was held in the Thunderdome for the very first time, and for some reason, this also meant the Raw Underground set got changed. Remember that Ivar vs Dolph Ziggler match that was advertised for this week? Yeah, it didn't happen. Fightful reported that the match was taped along with multiple other matches that would air on the 24th of August, but they were all scrapped thanks to Vince McMahon rewriting the entire episode of Raw. This shows us how much he really cared about Raw Underground. The Hurt Business show up again and Bobby Lashley wants a fight. Lashley was defeated in an arm wrestling contest earlier in the evening, so he doesn't care who it's against. He just wants to wreck a few jobbers. So Shane welcomes the boys in and Lashley begins his path of destruction by choking some poor guy out. Dolph Ziggler then steps up and he and Lashley go at it. We think Dolph has a chance when he locks in a sleeper, but in another example of the WWE being creatively bankrupt about this whole underground thing, Dolph gets taken out in the exact same fashion as last week. It's the same spot more or less, and this time nobody cares. The next guy gets knocked out with a kick to the arm, not even joking. Later on, we see Cedric Alexander getting his ass handed to him by Lashley. The Viking Raiders then come in for a brawl against the whole Hurt Business. Lashley, MVP and Benjamin make quick work of Eric and Ivar, and that's another episode in the books. This thing was dying after only a few short weeks, but hey, at least the Hurt Business looked pretty good. Zero direction here, guys. There is zero direction here. The following week, Shane McMahon tells Big Omas that we're going to see a new side of Titus O'Neil when he competes in Raw Underground. We're also going to see the debut of Jessamyn Duke along with Apollo Crews versus Shelton Benjamin. That new side of Titus O'Neil was pretty aggressive. He took out the usual job guys to start the action off, but when Riddick Moss stepped up, Titus went down. No one cares. The Iconics then come along to watch Jessamyn Duke versus Avery Taylor. Jessamyn wins in no time at all with quick punches and kicks, and when another competitor steps into the ring, Marina Shafir comes in to lend a hand. I'm no fashion expert, but I don't think she's really dressed for the occasion here, is she? Shafir makes another one tap out, and then Peyton Royce decides to sacrifice her iconic teammate Billie Kay. Billie gets thrown in the ring, she begs for help, but she ends up getting kicked in the head by Jessamyn Duke. Brilliant. The Shelton Benjamin vs Apollo Crews match didn't have a clear winner. Did you expect anything less? The Hurt Business end up brawling with Ricochet and Cedric Alexander, and another edition of Raw Underground ends with MVP, Lashley and Benjamin standing tall after everyone gets taken out. Raw Underground would only last for 3 more episodes on Raw before it got shit canned. So let's take a look at what happened on TV, then take a look at why the series got cancelled. September 7th, 2020, Kevin Owens is going to step into Raw Underground even though he and Shane have had their issues in the past. Currently, Kevin's having some problems with Aleister Black, so after Aleister gets done with Raw Underground jobber number 34, KO enters the ring and the fight's on. This one does have a bit more intrigue to it, seeing as you want to see how Owens would do in this kind of contest. But then you remember that this is Raw Underground and the production's so horrible that it's best to just close your eyes and imagine what the fight could be like. It goes to the outside, Alistair gets backdropped on the floor, we then go to commercial break, and Raw continues on with a completely unrelated match back inside the Thunderdome. So did KO versus Black just end, or what's the deal? No, apparently they kept fighting while Shayna Baszler took on the Riot Squad inside the ring. We go back to Raw Underground, Kevin and Alistair fight for about 20 seconds or so before it goes to the outside again, and then a brawl breaks out. We then cut back to the Thunderdome and Shayna Baszler, and I've no idea what's going on here. I just love watching two wrestling matches at the exact same time. How does it all end? Well, the two end up getting a bit close to Dabba Kato, so the big man comes in, he takes both Owens and Black out, and once again, we have no clear winner. If Raw Underground was good for maybe just one thing, it was maybe good for introducing Dabba Kato to viewers at home. You gotta wonder though if all the other sacrifices was worth it though. The following week, a new challenger stepped into Raw Underground, a guy who could probably take out each and every competitor if he wanted to, and that man was Braun Strowman. Braun attacked Dolph Ziggler and Riddick Moss during their fight, and when Titus O'Neil heard about this, our guy wanted to face Braun in a one-on-one fight. Titus would once again take a loss inside the Raw Underground warehouse. At the end of Raw, Riddick Moss and Dolph Ziggler tried to get some revenge on Braun, but it was no use. So here comes Big Dabba Kato. Shane stops Braun and Dabba from fighting in the ring. This match needs to be promoted. So next week we'll see these two giants go at it, and man, what a fantastic opportunity to put Dabba Kato on the map. A win over Strowman would make him one of the most feared competitors in the whole WWE. At this point, it kind of feels like Raw Underground was built to get Dabba Kato over, and maybe, just maybe, this could all pay off if WWE pulled off a shocker with Braun Strowman getting annihilated by a newcomer. But, guess what? No, guess what happens? Yeah, you're right. Braun Strowman annihilates Dabba Kato and Raw Underground disappears from TV screens forever. Kato even showed up inside the Thunderdome for a KO show segment before the Strowman match, and he got slapped right in the face just for the sake of it. So, fine work boys, fine work. Now, Dabba Kato would go on to do things in NXT, but talk about a missed opportunity to make something out of this entire mess. On top of that, Dolph Ziggler made Arturo Huas tap out, so I don't know what they were doing here. It's complete shit. The Wrestling Observer reported that Raw Underground ended due to COVID-19 concerns. Too many people in one room apparently. The risk was too great, so with social distancing in mind, WWE pulled the plug. If that was the case, why didn't Raw Underground return when these restrictions were relaxed? I'll tell you why. It's because Raw Underground was horrible and nobody wanted to see it again on TV. I don't buy the reasons given by the Observer at all, but that's what everyone went with. And so this weird series of work-shoot matches vanished and Shane McMahon's Fight Club hasn't been mentioned since. There was no reason given on TV, it was just over and Raw continued on as if nothing happened. Again, I must reiterate, fair play at least for trying something different. Times were hard and keeping people engaged in wrestling shows as 2020 rolled on seemed to get more and more difficult, but man did they ever miss the mark with this idea. I think it's one of those things that'll always come up when folks talk about the dumbest ideas WWE ever pulled off on their weekly Monday night television show. But yeah, there you go, that was Raw Underground, hope it never happens again. Thank you very much for watching today's video and please take care.